Hello everyone, and welcome to my mini lesson on poverty and socioeconomic status. My name is Rocio Alvarado, and I will be gladly teaching you about this topic. So let's go on to our first slide here. So we have here the case study, and this case study is found in chapter 3 of your books in class and socioeconomic status. This will give us a point of view into this young lady's life. So this case study is about a young lady named Christina and her English teacher, Thais Loftus. Thais Loftus started recognizing unusual behaviors from Christina. She would miss school very frequently and recently in that moment. She still turned in her homework but would not participate in class activities and showed signs of depression. He later found out that her family had moved and were living from neighbor to neighbor and from shelter to shelter. It would be hard for her to even bathe sometimes, and her parents spent so much time looking for jobs that could sustain them. Christina came to be embarrassed of their economic situation and is thinking about quitting school for a part-time job that could help her family. Her English teacher is afraid that if she leaves, she will never come back to school again. So this is a good insight on a high school student living in poverty or having a low income family. And I feel like we've all come across people that we've known or students that we've known that have had struggles within their family and their finances. So let's go on to the next slide so we can learn more about poverty. So a history and overview of poverty and socioeconomic status. Back in the 1800s, 81% of the world was in poverty. 190 years later, poverty fell to only 44%. The global extreme poverty rose in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was very huge during our pandemic. In 2018, 4 out of 5 people are below the international poverty lines and live in rural areas. Half of the poor are children, and the other half consists of being more women than men who are in poverty. So 132 million of the global poor live in high flood risk areas. So there are lots of things that connect to poverty. With the way people live, where they live, and what certain years that poverty rose more than others. So here are some stereotypes on poverty and SES, socioeconomic status. So as you follow with me, poor people do not value education because they are not as involved in their children's academics due to their economic status. So this is a stereotype a lot of teachers think about when they know their students are in low-income families. This is typically not true. There is no research that says that parents aren't as involved in their children's academics, nor it might be the case in some cases, but not in every single case at all. Another stereotype is poor people tend to be lazy. People see the homeless as this and that they have a weak work ethic when it comes to finding a job. I know many people who have told me that poor people or homeless people are just there. They're being lazy. They can't find. How is it that they can't find jobs? This is a very big stereotype for sure. And then poor people are seen as substance abusers, drugs, and alcohol. So this is neither proven right or wrong. I feel like it's the same, not that I feel like, but also research shows that it is the same between someone who is wealthy and someone who is homeless or poor or in a low income family to equally use substances, as well as people who are not poor and who are living wealthy. So another stereotype is poor and low-income families are seen as having poor communication skills. Just like the other stereotypes, this is neither here or there. There's research that does not show that each and every family has a lack of communication skills. And it just varies between the situations of families and people and how they were raised, for sure. So we're going to go on to our next slide. So this slide talks about, these next couple of slides we'll be talking about treatment of families, people living in poverty in today's society. So we're going to look at how society has been reacting to people in these low income statuses. So we have learned so far about people and families living in poverty and having low incomes. I want you, my students, to think about your everyday lives and how we react to those we come across who are homeless and who are struggling to make ends meet. And I want you to tell me, in your opinion, what are your opinions of them? What do you think about these families and people and students and friends who have low-income families, who you know is being raised in poverty or in poverty, who are homeless? What is your opinion of them? What do you think? Do you have certain stereotypes that you label low-income people / people living in poverty? Do you think that you have put some of these stereotypes we just talked about with some of your friends or people that you've seen in the street or people you've seen in general who you know have low income statuses or are homeless and in poverty? Have you put stereotypes on them like the ones we talked about just in this past slide? So I want you guys to really think about that. And we will be talking about that at the end of the mini lesson. Just really think about those two questions though. Analyze yourself. And we're going to go to the next slide. All right, so continued are the treatment of families of people living in poverty in today's society. Families of low-income homes have children raised in low-income environments. Because children grow up watching their families struggle, they themselves struggle in their schools and everyday lives to the point where they might give up on school and go straight to work. This is expected of low-income families and people for them to drop out of school and start working immediately. So a pattern we see a lot with low-income families and students is that sometimes students feel like they don't really need to go to school to study because they see their family struggle. So in their minds they're like, why do we have to study if studying doesn't help my family? I'd rather go to work instead of studying. And it's just something that discourages the continuation of their academics sometimes in some cases. Let's go on to the next slide. So this is a continuation of the treatment of families / people living in poverty in today's society. The ones affected by poverty the most in this society is children. There is a great mass of children who are homeless and have struggling families with low incomes. Children living in poverty result in being behind their peers in their academics and have a probability of repeating the cycle of staying in poverty, and as they grow up, have children of their own who also live in poverty. So this comes to sometimes be just a cycle in poverty. You can view it as something never ending because you see your parents struggle, you grow up, you go straight to work, and you yourself are going from job to job. And then you have children of your own who are raised in low-income families. And it's just it's a vicious cycle sometimes that we wish to put an end to. Poverty can create social tensions and can ultimately divide a nation because of income inequality. So dividing a nation because of income inequality. This is a quote I got from a resource that I used to get this information from. So there are different types of working classes in our society, and it may not be fairly distributed among individuals, the amount of income they received compared to others who are living in wealthier positions. So this is where inequality can come in, is with the inequality of income. And this is something that goes on every day, that compared to our wealthier counterparts, sometimes we are compensated unequally And this also drives poverty and is what creates low income families. So we go on to our next slide. So here is some recommendations for teachers on poverty and socioeconomic status. So we as teachers should keep ourselves informed on the myths of individuals living in poverty and be informed on our students who may be struggling with their families to make ends meet. So as a future teacher and educator, you want to keep yourselves informed on all the stereotypes that exist. And you want, as it says here, be informed on our students who may be struggling with their families, know where their needs need to be met, and be able to communicate with them. And we should read the signs of our students and ask ourselves whether our students are in need of certain resources based on the signs of poverty. Making assumptions without really knowing what is going on is never okay. Always be open-minded of all your students and where they come from instead of supporting stereotypes that may result being false. So sometimes stereotypes they're not accurate. And we tend to get ahead of ourselves sometimes as human beings on all the assumptions we think we know. But we should always have an open mind, especially as a teacher and educator with our students who are struggling and have low income families. So we should always be respectful and be very involved with our students' lives and families and communicate back and forth with them on their status, on where their needs need to be met, and see how we as a teacher can also help them and provide for our students' families with resources that may help them. We go on to this last slide that we're going to talk about a case study here, just like an insight on poverty from a single parent. So I was reading about this case study, and it's from this mom. Her name is Jenny. She is an unemployed single mother with 3 sons who each have a disability. So when she started her family, she switched to part-time work to be with them and care for them. She didn't just have one part-time job. Sometimes she would switch on and off with part-time job to provide something for her family and her sons. So Jenny separated from her husband in 1999 and was forced to live with her children in a woman's refuge. She now suffers from insomnia and stress. So this is where the poverty trap comes in for Jenny, because she is a single mother who is unemployed and has gone from job to job providing for her boys, and now she has nowhere to live. So because of her few qualifications and bouncing from part-time job to part-time job, it has gotten harder for Jenny to have an employment that will provide for her and her sons. So for Jenny, it's hard every day to live by going from job to job while also being a single mother to three sons who have disabilities. It's not easy, and she is trapped because of the way she was rooted. She went from job to job and has lacked the qualifications and skills she needs in order to maintain a good job that will pay her good money, or a fair amount of money that will sustain her and her sons. So each case is different. Each situation is very much different. It could be a single parent. It could be a 2-parent household with with siblings. The thing is to keep an open mind of where our students come from, because like Jenny, she has 3 sons who have disabilities. Our students who have disabilities, you don't know what their situations are like or where they're coming from. So we should always be involved as teachers and educators on the families that we come across. And we should always ask ourselves, are we using these stereotypes? Do we see these families and individuals with these stereotypes? Are we being unfair to them in any sort of way? We should always keep our mind open and to be able to provide for these students and these families. And this was my mini lesson for poverty and socioeconomic status. Thank you very much for listening. And these are the resources that we have used for these slides. And that's it.